lot of off-form concrete, a lot of sort of sandstone, a lot of timber, a lot of raw elements that a lot of our architects are just putting in as a standard and generic into each build. And I think, I think it's a real exciting time in the next sort of 20 years.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast, a regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Jason Economos, a builder in Sydney, Australia. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding Podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can ask questions and give feedback there too. Jason, thanks a million for being on the show. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Mate, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
I think you've come farther than anyone to be on this show. How did you even learn about the Fine Homebuilding Podcast?
Mate, I guess socials are a powerful tool, and mate, yeah, I'm just sort of sticking my ears to anything that I can find, and anything that sort of grasps my attention, and I'll be listening and forever trying to learn and expand my experience. So, yeah, been a long time listener.
That's fantastic. So we should tell folks, there was a bit of discussion when we were talking to you on the regular podcast about what time of day we would have to do, we would each have to be dealing with in order to record the show. It's what time there?
Mate, it's just gone 6 o'clock, so 6 a.m., which is, yeah.
And we should tell folks that it's 4 Eastern, so
yeah,
definitely a big time difference.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me about Sydney's climate first of off, because a lot of the things we talk about on the podcast relate to energy efficiency, and always part of the discussion is the climate. Can you tell me what it's like to build there, what your seasons are like? It's winter now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're smack bang middle of winter, so we're about 10 degrees Celsius, which by my calculations, we're sitting around 50 degrees your side of the ditch. Mate, that's probably as cold as it gets here, and in summer, the tail end of summer, around February, like January, we're getting up to usually some 40-degree days, which is around the 104, 105 Celsius. So it's, in Sydney itself, we don't get snow, but we're about a 5-hour drive to the mountains. And we get, 3 or 4 months of snow, nothing compared to, what most North American states usually endure through the winter. But yeah, it's quite modest seasons. I mean, our summers are dry. They're not super sticky and humid, but yeah, it's I guess a lot of people say we've only really got 2 seasons, a summer and a mild autumn. I'd probably put it as. So we don't really feel the 4 seasons, but yeah, we are fortunate in the sense that our schedules don't have to be per season. I'd imagine you guys in a lot of North American states would be having to dig in summer before the ground freezes, and that stuff absolutely fascinates me, because the worst we get here is a little bit of rain here and there, but bar that, our schedules just remain pretty optimistic and nothing.
Is it ever too hot, or you guys have very bad wildfires seasonally too? Is it ever too smoky or too hot to work outside? Do you have to plan around that?
Mate, last year was as you guys probably well aware, we had some pretty rough fires all around the state, or all around New South Wales, and yeah, it's super smoky. But there's health advice to stay inside, but it's not overly impactful to our schedules. And yeah, it's too hot to answer your question. When you're in primary school and high school, they reckon once it gets to 40 degrees, everyone gets to go home, but I was yet to see the day. But no, I mean, look, within reason, keep hydrated. But personally, I don't think there's anything better than up on a roof, just stripping tiles off and framing, in a 40-degree day, just sweating it out. I couldn't think of anything better. The best.
Can you talk about the business that you have with your partner? How many employees? What are the roles in the company? What kind of projects do you guys do?
Sure. So there's Mark and myself, both directors. We've been rolling up to our 5th year now in business. And our structure currently is 21 full-time employees. So that consists of Mark and I and a project manager. We've got a full-time girl in the office to take care of the marketing. And we have 6 site supervisors, 4 carpenters and 7 apprentices sort of floating around between sites. So we generally take on 6 to 8 jobs, depending with an overlap, of things being completed and things starting up again. So, general market, we've sort of shifted in the last couple of years into a bigger market, some new builds and dual locks, but we've still got our finger in a lot of various pies, so to speak, in terms of the renovation market as well. I guess at any one time we're doing, close to 2 new builds, 5 sort of large scale renovations between the 500 to $1 million mark, and then anything in between that needs to be finished off or continue through. So yeah, it's working quite well. Actually, we spend a lot of time developing systems and processes that Mark and I are now managing a lot of things from in-house inside the office. And if COVID's sort of taught us anything, I guess it's that we are expandable enough to be able to work remotely and keep an eye on our guys. And, it's really sort of pushed us into a new...
More managerial role. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're all carpenters by trade, every employee. So the process here is generally you finish school and you either move into a university role or into a trade, and you get signed up by a builder, which I believe you guys call GCs. And you do your 4-year apprenticeship, 3 years of schooling, and by the end of that, you're a qualified carpenter.
Do you feel like you are a qualified carpenter at the end of that point? Did you have some chops enough to be left alone mostly?
Mate, personally, yeah, Mark and I were very privileged in the sense that we got thrown in the deep end running jobs for our bosses quite early. You look back at it now, and at the time, it's what is going on here? You're leaving a 20, 21-year-old kid to finish off this $500,000 house. It just seems a bit bizarre. But when you look back in hindsight, to have that opportunity, you really sink or swim. And we're fortunate to get through it.
But come out the other end.
Absolutely. But, look, mate, don't get me wrong. But my vision for an expectation for a qualified carpenter, it should basically be able to be left on a job, should be able to pitch a roof, fit out a house. There's generally not many objectives that you shouldn't know how to do at the end of your time. And I'd like to say that our guys, and as they go through that 4-year process of working with us, that there's most if not all are up to that standard. But don't get me wrong, there's a lot of guys out there that unfortunately sort of abuse the apprenticeship role, so to speak, and just use it for cheap labour, and they're probably not getting the experience by the end of that 4 years that they should be getting.
They're carrying stuff, not learning stuff, is my guess, right?
Yeah.
So it's mostly wood frame construction in Australia. Does that vary throughout the country? Do you have masonry buildings too?
Yeah, absolutely. We've just finished a large 450 square metre home, which is around 5,000 square feet, which was all reverse brick veneer, so all concrete floor frames, bricks on the inside, timber frame on the outside. And I guess it's like majority is timber, but with the shortages going on at the moment, and you guys pinching all our timber, it's people are sort of forced to adapt and find new construction. I mean, we generally say, being carpenters in house, no problem, we'll do everything in lightweight and we'll just wrap everything and insulate it. But these days, I'm seriously considering masonry construction for at least the framing and getting it up to lock-up stage purely around materials.
Because of the prices, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, do you have problems with insects, termites and carpenter ants like we do in North America, especially in the southern part of the U.S.? That's a big problem. How do you deal with that? Yeah,
absolutely. We've got an abundance of termites here in New South Wales. Further south, I don't believe so. Further north, I think they're a bit more scarce, but here we're kind of in the sweet spot. So personally, I live in the bush, so we're back onto quite a bit of greenery and a lot of shrubs, and we're kind of right in the middle of the bushfire zone here where I live. So everything's all our timber is minimum H2 treated, which isn't external. That's H3, but our grading starts off as H2 is sprayed for termites, so they won't eat it. But our biggest challenge is protecting the existing, especially on the renovations, existing structures and frames. So we've got a lot of termite coating. I imagine it'd be quite similar. There's three real processes that we do deter them, which is like a flashing or a damp-proof course, like a termi mesh it's called, and that just goes under all frames or anything that links outdoor with inside. Museum caps on any piers, which basically deters the termites, but you can see the path for them coming through into the subfloor.
Is that like a metal shield or something? Is
correct.
that what? Yeah.
Metal shield, and then the third is regularly spraying. So technically, every house we put a little sticker in the meter board, and every 12 months they're supposed to get it treated by someone to come past and spray. But yeah, I mean, it's we do come across a lot of renovations that we open up, homes that are 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, and majority of the walls and roof frames have been eaten out. So it is quite common. New construction, I really think that, there's enough measures and protection in place that we're not really going to have these issues in 20, 30, 40 years time down the track.
What are some of the concerns of home builders in Australia? If someone were to ask me this question, I would say, labor shortage, material shortage, cost of permitting, difficulty getting insurance, providing healthcare coverage. What are some of the things that folks in Australia who are building houses have to deal with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's obviously the construction industry as a whole. There's just so many moving parts, and everything going on in the world of the past 18 months. The timber supply is definitely up there with one of the challenges. I mean, Mark's basically full-time role has been sourcing timber. We're ordering things, 4 or 5 months in advance now, as soon as we're signing contracts. And our LVLs and all our timber's turning up in drips and drabs as we've required it. So we've been quite fortunate. But that's something on top of, their usual
normal stuff,
challenges.
Right? Yeah,
absolutely. But I'd say a big issue with a lot of builders that we hear about is labour shortage. I'd say, and the proper training. I mean, apprentices these days here, they're coming out taking home $700 a week, $800 a week out of their first year, and that's as a 18-year-old kid straight out of high school. And I don't mean to sound like, back in my day, but mate, I was taking home $250 a week, I think. And I understood that because, you're there to learn. You're getting paid to learn, basically. And you compare it with the kids going to university that are coming out of there with 50, 60 grand debts after their 4 years of learning and experience. And the fact that we're privileged enough to be able to come to work, better your skills. You're working in a trade. Is there anything better than working outside and working with your hands? And at the end of the day, and the visual progress, you just take a step back and think, all right, well, this is what we did today. I just feel like it's super fulfilling. And I guess a lot of guys really struggle to understand the value in paying a kid that sort of money. I mean,
they're comparing it to what they made, like you do, right?
Yeah.
They're just like, that's nuts. No one makes that much money as an apprentice, but that's
absolutely
if you need them.
Yeah, and it's really, really market reflective. I mean, when it's hot, guys can come straight out of the time and charge ridiculous money. 45, 50 an hour as a subcontractor carpenter, where a lot of these guys are coming out and they don't know how to hang a door, and it's and unfortunately someone's going to pay it. So then it leaves the rest of the guys that are searching for qualified staff that they're sort of scratching their heads going, well, I can't afford this, and the consumer's ultimately paying for the additional cost, and it just makes selling projects a little bit harder and more complicated. But I mean, as a solution, the government has come out and incentivized any apprentices that come through to keep, there seems to always be a labour shortage, so they're really trying to appeal to apprentices to take on a trade they're actually paying half their wage for the first 12 months they're employed, which is huge. It's a really good step in the right direction.
It's a good enticement as a builder to bring somebody on, right? If you only have to pay them half of what they're making, that's huge, I'm sure.
Huge. And it allows us to spend the time and training that, rather than saying, oh, okay, well, I've got this first year or second year apprentice that, I need to pull up this driveway by hand because we can't get a machine in here. This is you for the next 2 weeks, or move all these bricks down. It entices us and incentivizes us to get a labourer to do that sort of thing. And you can really, grab the apprentice and show them they can work underneath you and, push them in the right direction and learn those skills. So I do think it's a big step in the right direction. And I'm just, fortunate and hopeful that guys won't abuse the situation.
I've heard from other builders in Australia that building envelopes could be better than they are, much like here in the States, I would add. What entity in Australia writes and enforces the building codes? And do you guys have like a crazy 2-volume thick, ridiculous set of rules like we do here?
Yeah, it's, mate, as long as I can remember, it's being called the BCA, the Building Code of Australia. In recent times, it's changed to the NCC, which is the National Construction Code, which basically is nationwide, and it's up to each state to interpret, state and territory to interpret their own set of rules. I mean, we're on the East Coast, which we share with Victoria and Queensland and New South Wales. We're sort of sandwiched in the middle, and, Victoria is naturally quite cold and prone to weather and their own challenges. And Queensland, far north Queensland, is naturally hot all year round. They're 35 degrees right through. So we're sort of in the middle, and we get a bit of a feel for both. So each state has its own requirements, but ultimately they all come under the NCC. I think due to our climate, we're not, and I'm speaking specifically around Sydney and New South Wales, that we're not enduring ridiculous climates. It gets up to 40 degrees, but most people are just whacking on their aircon for an hour and their whole house gets cooled. I think we here have really missed the boat in terms of passive homes and envelopes and really airtight homes over the years, because it hasn't been required. So I don't think the building science and the thought and energy has gone into it. And, the NCC is a minimum code. Most guys are building above that code for obvious reasons. Us, a little part that we do, everything, we've got our own sort of sarking and flashing and cladding procedures, which I believe you guys call siding. And basically we're putting as thick or as dense insulation in our walls and ceilings as we can in every project, because the cost is minimum. And, you can't go
air sealing. Is air sealing an emphasis? Do you have air tightness testing?
Mate, it's starting to come through now. There is a movement, which is great, but a lot of guys are inexperienced in air tightness and, even just wrapping their homes up. It's not something that's really been policed or pushed through here. But in the last 5 years or so, there's definitely been a movement, towards passive homes and air sealing and basically, tightening those envelopes. That I think is really, really a right move and a good move in the right direction. But I mean, there's so many sort of holes we can go down with you, but it's something that I definitely think we're behind the 8 ball on for sure.
Do you think your clients are informed about good buildings and building science? Like, do they have any understanding of how their house works or how their new project will work when it's done?
I think more and more these days, I'd say and as bad as this sounds, I'd say maybe 1 or 2 out of 10 clients are sort of questioning that. We have every home that goes through council here or through private certifiers, we end up with a BASICS report, right, which is basically a thermal efficiency report, which tells us minimum requirements for windows, insulation, hot water, HVAC, electrical, basically all these minimum requirements that we have to meet. And a lot of clients are happy with those minimum because they aren't educated enough. Well, they're not asking the right questions as far as, my opinion. They're not asking the right questions of, well, can we up this? Can we better this? Because a lot of the time to go from, a 5 out of 10 rating to go to an 8 out of 10 rating, the cost is minimal. It's just a few sort of tweaks here and there. And so we do try our best at educating clients along the way and teaching them, a better, more efficient way to build. But ultimately, it's budget plays a big impact, as I'm sure you're aware. And the housing market here, I'll probably going off path a little bit, but as the rest of the world has experienced over the last 12, 18 months, but we've had a boom for the last 10 years prior to that, and houses have doubled in the last sort of 6 years or so. I think the median house price in Australia is around in Sydney is around 1.1 million, which is that varies from, and that's the median. So you go to the eastern suburbs and you can't buy a house there under $2.5-3 million. So
are these folks moving to the city, or are these folks coming from other countries? What's putting the pressure on the housing market?
Made a lot. Money's cheap at the moment, low interest rates. We've obviously had quite strict borders locked down since COVID happened, but everything's internal and there's a lot of panic buying. I put it down to the people aren't going on holiday, so they've got a bit more disposable income. And but yeah, people are. So where I live, it's about 40 minutes south of the CBD in the Sutherland Shire, and it's basically people call it a bubble, but it's kind of a pretty well kept secret. We're on the coast, we've got the beaches, we've got the rivers, we've got the bush, we've got all the national park down here, and it's always been that. In the CBD, it's say a house is worth $3 million, down here is probably worth $2 million. So it's kind of been a best kept secret, although everyone's now understanding that, hey, I don't have to work from the CBD, so I will move an hour south and I get the best of both. We can work from home for the 3 days. So that's obviously pouring a lot of sort of inner city cash out to the suburbs, which I'm sure is happening across the rest of the world as well. And all these people, they're selling their small 100 square meter terrace in the middle of Bondi Beach for $3.5 million. They're buying a block of land out here for 1.5 and spending $1 million on a build, and they've got this
huge house now,
4,500 square feet that overlooks it. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, went down a little hole there. Apologies, but
no, it's interesting, and I find it especially interesting that the parallels are so close. It's the same thing that if you were building in Boston or San Francisco or any of the other major cities in the U.S., we'd be having the same conversation virtually.
Absolutely.
So I told my coworkers at our staff meeting today that I was talking to you, and my friend Matt Milham, he said, ask him if he's ever heard of an asphalt shingle. Have you ever heard of an asphalt shingle? What are your roofing choices that you commonly deal with?
Mate, purely from pinning my ear to the States and understanding how you guys build, but over here, no, it's basically unheard of.
You have metal shingles, right? Most commonly, is that true?
Yeah. So, metal roofing shingles are quite shingles, as in aren't generally used. We've got our main sort of roof lining options are a steel roof, so we call color bonds. Which is, you just come in your sheets and layout and roof tiles. But I'd say probably 90% of homes are all ColourBond steel roofing. Shingles definitely have their place, but it's mainly tying into existing, Victorian features or something that's been done quite a while ago. But very, very different in that sense in terms of, roof lining and cladding and siding over here, yeah. But asphalt belongs on the road, mate. Over here, asphalt belongs on the road.
What about siding choices? Like, what on inexpensive homes? Is it stucco? It's not vinyl? I'm guessing it's too hot, but I might be wrong about that.
Yeah, I love it. Siding. It took me a while to wrap my head around the lingo. We call siding cladding.
Okay.
Which is
so people who are trying to put on airs would be who would call siding cladding in this country. I would say they're getting all fancy.
Yeah.
Like you hear designers say that, maybe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Mate, siding, it varies. Vinyl was around, that PVC with the foam backing and insulation. That was around, 30, 40. My parents' house had that when I was growing up, and that was definitely a movement probably around the 70s or 80s. In more recent times, a lot of it is James Hardie fibre cement products.
That originated there, as I recall, right? That's an
Yes.
Australian company, yeah?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. That's super common. You know, they've got a lot of profiles that, you know, you buy off the shelf and all gets painted, etc. So I'd say probably like almost half construction or modern construction is using some sort of fibre cement product. Then we've got different paths of, you know, timber and you know, there's real movement on raw timber externally, but due to our hot elements, you know, sun, salt, wind, rain, the maintenance and upkeep is a little bit too much for a lot of people, unless they like, you know, the timber batten silvering off, and then that's a whole nother path. But other options, you know, there's like composite timber panels, like a WeatherTex is another brand that goes on, and it's a mixture of real timber and sort of plastic composite, super sustainable, and you can get that real timber look as well, without the maintenance and upkeep. And then there's definitely in the last, you know, 5 years or so, there's been a real movement for the steel wall cladding, standing seam, you know, almost like shipping container style, that definitely has its place, and there's a real art to it, you know, and it's they're probably the main siding that we're doing, but I'd say, you know, majority is all fibre cement products.
What about windows? What materials are your windows made, and how do they operate? Are they double hung? Are they casement? Maybe the descriptions are completely different.
No, that's it. You know, the main windows are doors are stackers, sliding, bifolds. Windows, we've got sliding, awning, casement, louvers, double hung. I think it's all pretty generic compared to what you guys use as well. But I'd say aluminium is probably the most desirable. Obviously, it doesn't have the same thermal efficiencies as PVC and timber as well, but it looks great. They're reasonable, you know, minimal upkeep, and it sort of ticks the boxes that we can use them for. But there's definitely a movement for PVC and even timber due to the, you know, the thermal mass and properties. A lot of people are opting towards them as they get more experience. I guess it all comes down to a lot of the architects and designers as well, what they spec, and it depends on the area. You know, we do a lot of work in the inner west of Sydney, which is quite a quirky, conservative area in Sydney, that there's a lot of, you know, a lot of people have respect for nature and want to be quite conscious of the environment out there, as opposed to, you know, working in another area where it's the complete opposite. And Sydney's quite large, but, you know, you drive 20 minutes and it's a whole different feeling.
What do you think Australia can teach the rest of the world about home building and remodeling? What do you guys do really well? Yeah.
This is a hard one, mate, but a bit of a humble brag, I guess, but I'd like to say our architecture is in a world of its own. I think how we operate and how we build, I haven't really seen many homes, you know, apart from those ridiculous homes up in LA and hills and everything like that. But I find our architecture is definitely progressing in custom homes. You know, from my understanding, a lot of North American homes are through developments in estates, and, you know, or spec homes, as you guys call them, which just absolutely fascinates me as well. I'd like to go down that path. But most builders here, you know, there's builders here, and there's project home builders, you know, custom home and project home, and you do one or the other. You don't do both. But a lot of the architects are, you know, with the software and the creativity that's coming out now, it's, you know, I really think that we're in a world of its own in terms of what's coming out. You know, there's a lot of off-form concrete, a lot of sort of sandstone, a lot of timber, a lot of raw elements that a lot of our architects are just putting in as the standard and generic and into each build. And I think, you know, it's a real exciting time in the next sort of 20 years to be driving through a lot of the streets around Sydney and seeing what's being built.
Cool. Do you think that, I mean, I think a lot of builders, and myself included, would say that architects are often poorly trained to actually design houses. They don't have any hands-on experience. Do you think that's the same? Is that similar in Australia, or is that less of an issue?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, the well-renowned architects are there because they have an understanding, and they get in the field and they understand why this, they can't just draw something and imagine it all go together. They've got to understand the fundamentals behind it. We work with an architect daily. 3 years ago or so, we sort of teamed up and we were first point of contact for a lot of, mums and dads and clients that were saying, rather than going to the architects first, they'll come to the builders. And instead of us just palming them off to an architect, we would be there and hold their hand through the whole prelim process. And, we'd chime in with budget estimates before it goes to council. And through that time and period, I really got an understanding of, hey, this is how architects think, this is how they operate. Not all of them, it's just basically a one-on-one, but it really opened my eyes to think we come from two completely different backgrounds. We've got the same path, we're building the same, we're trying to build the same end goal here, and we just have two very different mindsets. So I'd like to think that I've taught them a lot, they've taught myself a lot as well, and it's just interesting how, a lot of architects don't understand. They don't come from a building background. They don't, they're not carpenters, obviously, but they're just, I think there's definitely a disconnection there between what's on paper and what comes to fruition, for sure.
What do you think Australia could be doing better with regard to home building?
Mate, I definitely think sustainability and environmental impact, for sure. I see a lot of waste. I see a lot of waste materials on each side, and even just packaging. I just think
the packaging is insane.
It's what does my head in, right? There's a movement on banning plastic straws, right, which is great. I think we're not far off between single-use plastic and straws and everything. But you buy a pack of timber, the thing's got 4 million straws wrapped around it already. Like, find a better way. We're trying to put out a bushfire with a bucket of kerosene. Don't get rid of the straws. You buy a TV and there's just 400 plastic cups just wrapped in this TV. Like, start at the big section, bring it back down.
And it's worse, right? It's worse since COVID because we're all buying stuff different ways.
Yeah. I definitely think, as small as it sounds, but I think that's such a big move that we can all work towards. It's so simple.
Boy, that should be like an international effort. I think we should start
Absolutely.
it. We're going to do that.
100%.
What do you hear on our podcast or other construction media that has you scratching your head about American home building? I can't wait to hear your answer about this.
Mate, let's go down the spec home route, okay?
Okay.
I hear so many builders that, I'm doing a custom home and I'm building a spec home. And it's like, and I'm just like, so it took me weeks of listening and wrap my head around. Okay, spec home is basically something that's an architect's design, or you're buying the plan off the internet, to say, right? And it's quite a generic home. And I just imagine that every block is the exact same sort of format and fall inside. Like, it's just like a field of flat lands, and they're all divided up equally to the millimeter, and you can just put this spec home straight on it. Here,
that pretty much really sums it up, man.
And you can't spend too much because you won't get your return on investment, and they're purely about investment. And you can build a spec home here and a custom home right next door, and there's just so many different fundamentals around it. Here, how it works, if there's a new estate that opens up, sure, like, one of the large project home companies, there's probably 10 or 20 that are really well known. You buy a house and land package, right? And that whole area gets developed. But that they only do that, Custom home builders over here are working for clients, and working in building architectural homes, but it's very rare that the builders would do their own spec home themselves. If they do it, then they're technically more of a developer, right? But you don't hold back. Most guys here are just pouring everything into it as they can. And I guess it's all dependent on the market and whatnot as well. But it just fascinates me how guys can go from building amazing, beautiful custom homes to building sort of cheap and nasty spec homes at the flick of a switch. We wouldn't be able to do that. I don't know many guys that would. It's just a completely different scenario. It just fascinates me.
It's kind of an unusual model. I will totally agree. So what kind of learning opportunities are there for good Australian builders? Do you have podcasts like we do, and magazines, trade shows? Like, what are the big things that you all pay attention to?
Mate, there's a few, but you guys are just, it's the reason that we're talking here today. You guys are just, I just really love the way that you guys sort of dive into things. There's a few Aussie guys out here trying to do it, and in all honesty, I've had it on my to-do list for the last 2 years or so that I'd love to get a small podcast up and running. And as I said, I think I spoke to you before, Pat, I just love talking, mate, and I just once I finish talking here,
there's
I'll
a
go
lot
talk
of that.
Absolutely, but no, I think it's evolving, and I think it's definitely coming up. The trade shows, nothing like what you guys have. You guys just do everything bigger and better. There's no question around it. But yeah, there's a lot of sort of online seminars and sort of meet and greets and this and that. But I really think the social connection, through Instagram and Facebook, and that's where we get a lot of sort of networking and find a lot of advice, and a lot of guys putting up videos and better understanding. But I just find myself listening to a lot of podcasts, from the States, and hopefully that interaction makes its way over here, and a few guys start putting their hand up, because I haven't done anything about it. So,
well, you're going to have to now.
Absolutely.
We used to get this crazy Australian magazine at the offices of Fine Homebuilding called Owner Builder, and it was dedicated to the folks who were building their own house. Is that a big market there? Because that's kind of rare here. Or
Nuts.
Yeah. Nuts. Yeah.
It's what you think, right? Don't get me wrong, it's got its place. I think over here, right, and what it does, it opens the mums and dads to be able to. We've got a lot of reality TV shows. I'm sure you guys do as well.
Yes.
Most are bad. Main ones. Yeah. All. Now we've got one called The Block, right? And basically what they do, they get 10 couples, and they throw them in this house, and they throw them in a house each, and they all build the house in 10 weeks, right? And then they sell it, and they keep the profit, and blah, blah, blah. And what that's done is started a movement of mums and dads going, hang on a second. If I do a 2-day course, a weekend course, I become a qualified builder, and I can manage and write. And I'm probably get a lot of hate from all the mums and dads out there. This is just how an industry professional sees it, right? And basically, they are then qualified to obviously not undergo the works themselves, but they can project manage their own house, right? You can't do it on a new build or a duplex, or something that's a large scale, but it's designed for people putting a first floor addition or an extension on their house, or renovating a bathroom, or etc. And you can only ever do one. So you do this course and become an owner builder, and basically the trades that this assists with is getting your building license here is quite hard for a lot of guys, because there's a lot of insurances and home warranty insurance and etc. around it, and it's quite challenging. You finish your apprenticeship, you do 2 years of night tape with 3-4 hour nights a week for 2 years. And then you have to prove that you're financially stable. And then you've got a limit on what you can build at any one time, which is your home warranty insurance. So it's quite a challenge for young guys that, 25, 30-year-olds trying to come out and start their own business. So then what happens, they get poached by owner builders who have done their course and they're completely 100% qualified. And they basically leverage them and use their trades, and they pay them, etc. So they're not physically building their house, but they're licensed, and there's no issue with engaging their own trades and getting their own plumber, tiler, waterproof, plasterer, etc. But there's not many owner builders I've spoke to that would happily do it again. So maybe that says something around it. I'm not sure.
I think
but no, the
does.
magazine, I haven't come across it, Pat, to be honest.
It's weird, man. It was like a lot of rammed earth construction and recycled material. You can imagine what it's like. Yeah,
I can. Absolutely.
So this is my favorite part of the show. Can you tell me about your own house? Do you have any new or lingering problems that you're either happily or unhappily ignoring?
Yeah, so we actually bought a little sandstone cottage at just as COVID hit, March last year, actually, on my 29th birthday. We bought a house, this little sandstone cottage on quite a large block, 3,000 square meters, which is, what are we? 3,000 times, I think it's like what, times 10. So,
Well, it's like 3,000 square feet, right? Or
times 10,
same,
so 30,000 square
30,000,
feet.
yeah.
Yeah, it's this huge block in the bush. And basically last year I spent my time on weekends and poaching any of my apprentices on Saturdays and Sundays, basically rebuilding everything. And that's where I'm sitting right now. So it's this little sandstone cottage that I don't get an opportunity to get on the tools much these days. I'm mostly sitting behind a desk in an office. So that was a very enjoyable way for 8 or 9 months, building the house from scratch, basically. And yeah, so
Were you doing this while you were living in there?
No, I moved back with mum. Moved back with my mum. She's just around the corner. No, it was a complete gut new build. There was one sandstone wall that stayed. So yeah, we spent the better part of last year building here. So it was really rare, I think, for builders to have that opportunity straight into it. You know, every builder I know has their house with, oh, I've still got to do this, I've got to do that, my basement's not finished, we've got to do this or that. And don't get me wrong, there's a couple of those. Like that sliding door there, it doesn't have a guide on the bottom. So every night when I close the door, it rattles its way in. And my partner thinks it's normal now, so she doesn't even know any better, which is great. But yeah, we're pretty lucky to be able to build this, and we've got it in plans in council to start next year, the second stage. So yeah, keep an eye out on our socials for that journey next year, which is exciting. But yeah, you know, we've got a lot of 300 mil, which is, you know, a foot wide sandstone blocks covering the whole facade, which I'd never really worked with before, which was an amazing challenge. You know,
it sounds heavy.
Yeah,
that sounds so heavy.
Mate, they're heavy. They're like, you know, I think the house was originally built in the 40s, and all the sandstone is actually from the excavation, which was all done by hand. So it's crazy. Yeah, they're heavy blocks, but mate, yeah, definitely things that I think every builder can relate to, that things they would have done differently, you know. And but apart from that wobbly door, everything else is pretty much complete at this stage, which is exciting. So it's not the typical builder narrative, but you know, it's really used our resources. Is
your wife into like the home improvement, the home building thing too? Is she a hands-on type person? She's into it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. She's studying interior design at the moment. She's got a real passion for it. She really got that itch designing our house here as well. So she's back in school and designing it. She's actually from up your way. She's from Canada, moved here 4 years ago. So it's probably part of my connection, I guess, to North America as well. And you know, sort of listen to a lot of you guys, and I can relate with a lot. And, you know, when I'm up there, and that's when I'm just driving through the middle of, in winter in Canada, obviously it's freezing cold. And I'm like, well, what's everyone doing now? You know, what do they do? What are all the chippies doing, the carpenters doing while it's snowing outside? She goes, oh, they all go plow snow. And it's like, what? Like, they do that as well?
If you're lucky, you get to work inside, but I can tell you there are many horrible winter days I spent working in snow and rain, and I remember shoveling like floor systems right before you could start framing the day before, so you spend an hour or two shoveling a foot of snow before you can even get started actually moving any sticks into place. It's crazy.
That just blows my mind.
I'm moving to Australia, man. It sounds like living's easy there.
Oh, I don't know that, but it's in terms of seasons, yeah, it's quite modest, and it's not too bad. But don't get me wrong, you know, I'd love to be able to work in those elements, and I love the thought and the race of, hey, we've got to dig these footings and pour it before the ground freezes. Like, what? It's awesome.
Funny to put it in perspective. You know, there are different problems depending where you live, right? And I was in the Pacific Northwest one time, and the guys were talking about their respective tool belts. And the one guy said to the other one, well, you got to have the one with the big grommets and the hole in it. Otherwise, they fill up with water when you're out there framing, because it rains for so much of the day in the winter. And it's just like, that's crazy to me that it would just seem to be really horribly uncomfortable. So
Absolutely, mate. You've got to get around the Buckaroos, the best nail bag.
So
Buckaroo.
Okay.
It's just Australian leather nail bag. Look them up, Patrick. The best.
You should write this up for the magazine, Jason. That's a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right,
mate. They're in a world of its own, and what a name as well. Such an Aussie.
Is it leather or is it nylon?
Leather.
Cool.
Leather.
That's cool.
Yeah, you can really tell a carpenter's stature by the nail bag they wear, I think.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Jason. Is there anything you want to ask or tell our listeners before we part company? And you have to go to work.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, mate, we're actually in a bizarre sort of snap lockdown. We've had such a good run out here in Australia, but we in recent times, you guys might have heard, we're a bit of a laughing stock in terms of our vaccine rollout. We had almost single-digit cases through this whole thing, and now it's kind of just sort of blown up and exploded. So it's the first time all our sites have been shut down, and there's the office crew is still working remotely from home, but all the other guys are fortunate enough to be out surfing every day and playing golf and just doing their thing for the next 2 weeks, and it's crazy. But so yeah, I've got a little bit of cabin fever at the moment, to be honest.
I bet you do. You're going to start a project, I can almost guarantee.
Well, mate, I'm starting to write some notes for this podcast coming, so watch your back.
I welcome it. Maybe you'll have me as a guest. I would be honored.
Absolutely. You can be number one guest, Patrick.
Well, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of feedback, Jason, from listeners of the show of all the things that people wanted me to ask you that I didn't. So I hope you'll consider coming back on, or at least answering some of the stuff that we get later from listeners. I'd
love that opportunity for sure.
Cool.
Definitely. It's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
It's been great, man. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thanks to Jason for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Jason, you were awesome. Thanks so much.
Cheers,
Stay safe, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers.
Happy building.